That way, they can sidestep the question of whether they have the power to do something and proceed directly to considering how they're going to do it. And by do something, I mean enforce their views about how you should live your life. Now, as far as I know, Lewis Carroll never went to law school, so it's almost scary how accurately he captured what currently passes for judicial reasoning in a conversation between Alice and Humpty Dumpty from Through the Looking Glass. "There's glory for you," Humpty Dumpty said. "I don't know what you mean by glory," Alice said. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously. "Of course you don't, till I tell you. I meant, there's a nice knockdown argument for you." "But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument," Alice objected. "When I use a word," Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, "it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less." "The question is," said Alice, "whether you can make words mean so many different things." "The question is," said Humpty Dumpty, "which is to be master, that's all." And if you care to check out Justice Scalia's book, A Matter of Interpretation, you'll find in the very first chapter, he confirms that this is an accurate description of what's taught in American law schools. I wish I was kidding about that, but I'm not. So what allows judges to keep getting away with this kind of nonsense? Well, basically they rely on two things. Obviously, there's the police, and I'll get to them in a moment. What's less obvious is how they rely on what hypnotists call waking hypnotic suggestion. In hypnosis, you help someone relax into a state of heightened suggestibility, called a trance. And then you make suggestions like, when someone offers you a beer, you'll realize you'd rather have a glass of water instead. Now in stage hypnosis, which is where most people see hypnosis, the goal is entertainment. So the suggestions are often pretty absurd, like your hand is stuck to your forehead, or the number 6 no longer exists for you, or the word left now means right, and vice versa. But doesn't that last one sound a lot like the suggestions that judges make when writing opinions? Here's a professional secret. You don't really need the trance. You can get the same results over a longer period by repeating waking hypnotic suggestions if there's sufficient respect for whoever's making them. So the most important job of a hypnotherapist turns out not to be to help you enter a trance. It's to help you identify the waking hypnotic suggestions that are controlling you now so you can replace them with better ones. Let me give you an example. The other day I was leafing through this pocket edition of the US Constitution when I came across this little gem from Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes. He said, "We are under a constitution, but the constitution is what the judges say it is, and the judiciary is the safeguard of our liberty and our property under the constitution." You hear this idea that the constitution is what the judges say it is? That the courts get to say what the law means? Constantly. I mean, you hear it from the judges themselves, obviously, but you also hear it from teachers and textbooks and journalists and law professors and pundits and politicians. And you've heard it so often, in fact, that I would bet that most of you don't even notice it anymore. But it's a waking hypnotic suggestion, and it's killing the rule of law. So you need to stop accepting it. But how? Well, you listen for it, and you notice it when you hear it. And once you become aware of it, you will not believe how often and how casually this thing is tossed around. And you replace it with this suggestion. The law says what the law means, or it's not law. To keep this game going, the courts need to maintain a veil of prestige and dignity to create the respect that allows those suggestions to be effective without trance. Now, anger can't pierce this veil. It's just easy for anybody to keep acting superior towards someone who's angry at you. But laughter can pop it like a balloon. It's almost impossible to remain dignified when the people you're trying to impress are rolling their eyes or snickering behind their hands or just laughing at you openly. So don't get angry at the courts or at the representatives who do their bidding. Instead, mock them. Make jokes. When you testify at hearings or call into radio talk shows, ask them embarrassing questions like, "Hey, if the Supreme Court said tomorrow that up means down, would you just go along with that? Or is there actually a limit to your gullibility? And what would you actually do if that limit's ever reached?" If we do this relentlessly, I think we can move towards a day when their solemn and self-serving pronouncements will be treated with the same reverence and respect that we now reserve for horoscopes. I know it's cold out, but because it's so timely and so pernicious, I'd like to bring up one other example of waking hypnotic suggestion from a case decided just a few days ago in Pennsylvania, Suarez versus Holder. Here's a quotation from the court's opinion in that case. Possession of firearms by felons is not conduct falling within the scope of the Second Amendment's guarantee of law-abiding citizens to bear arms in defense of hearth and home. Say what? How did the words law-abiding and in defense of hearth and home get in there? The words of the Second Amendment protect the right of the people, period, to keep and bear arms, period. What's amazing is that throughout the rest of this opinion, the court acts as if those additions are part of the Second Amendment. It's as if, as far as they're concerned, the country has already gone through the amendment process and added these qualifications to the Constitution. Of course, that didn't really happen, but at the same time, in a sense, it did. And that's because in discussions about the Second Amendment and Article 2A, the word people is nearly always expanded automatically into the phrase law-abiding people. And not just by courts, but by people who should know better, like NRA, or Gun Owners of America, or Go New Hampshire, or even JPFO, for crying out loud. You just heard Susan say it. The idea that law-abiding people is synonymous with people is another waking hypnotic suggestion. And it always saddens me to hear people stand up at a hearing or a place like this and criticize the legislature for ignoring the words of the written Constitution while using this phrase which supports and even encourages the thing they're complaining about. If you find yourself using the phrase law-abiding people when talking about your right to keep and bear arms, then you are enabling the game that they are playing because you're playing it with them. So please just drop the phrase law-abiding from your vocabulary when talking about the Second Amendment or Article 2A, unless, of course, you're suggesting that they should be amended to contain that qualification. But if you are suggesting that, then you might want to find a phrase that says a little more precisely what you mean. Suppose, for example, that the government enacts a law requiring all firearms to be registered with the state police. And suppose you decide to ignore it. And suppose you get caught. By definition, you're not law-abiding. So by your own admission, you no longer have a right to those guns, do you? You see the problem? So by the way, this whole we live under the rule of law, we live under the rule of law thing, that's also a waking hypnotic suggestion. Okay, so what about the police? Well, ideally, we would just ignore laws that are in obvious conflict with a strict reading of the federal and state constitutions. But the police aren't going to let us do that. Enforcing those laws is how they make their living. So we can't ignore the police. And we don't want to fight the police, especially after we spent so much money arming and training them. There's a lot of talk lately about demilitarizing the police, but what if we just defund them instead? What if we just stop paying them? Or most of them anyway. In national parks, the way you keep bears from nosing around in campsites is you stop feeding them. Eventually, they go away. This is the same basic idea. If there are only enough police officers to deal with actual crimes, like murder, assault, theft, then it really doesn't matter too much what pseudo-crimes the legislature wants to dream up, or how the courts want to rewrite those. A law that doesn't have anyone to enforce it is a law that you can ignore. So, how many police officers do we really need? Let's look at a randomly selected town like Sutton. According to the 2013 annual report of the Sutton Police Department, once you eliminate stuff like getting cats down from trees, there were 64 actual crimes, 28 deaths, and about a dozen cases each of assault, burglary, and fraud. This is a little more than one crime per week. And to cope with this flood of nefarious activity, the town maintains 3 full-time and 3 part-time police officers. Do you think they could get along with just one? Maybe a part-timer? Now, one of the great things about New Hampshire is we still have town meetings where people directly approve police budgets. And many of the people here today will have a chance to participate in those meetings in the next coming weeks. It's probably too late to make significant changes this year, but it's not too early to start raising the issue. Now, some of you are no doubt wondering, as tempting as it sounds to get the police out of our hair, what would we do without them? Well, here's what Sir Robert Peel said when he created the idea of the professional police force. The police are the public, and the public are the police. The police are nothing more than members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen. That is, police officers get paid to do what the rest of us are supposed to do anyway for free. And here's something to consider. Article 8 of the New Hampshire Constitution doesn't attract a lot of attention, but it may contain the most fundamental idea in the entire document. all power residing originally in and being derived from the people, all the magistrates and officers of government are their substitutes and agents. Not rulers, not even leaders, substitutes and agents. Now, someone who's substituting for you or acting as your agent in a matter can't do anything that you couldn't do yourself if you wanted to. Take a moment to think about whether you, as an individual, could require your neighbor to ask you for permission to carry a concealed gun. It's ridiculous, right? So how can you send a substitute or an agent to Concord to do that on your behalf? Your representatives work for you. They're like your employees, as Susan mentioned. And the police work for them, so they're like employees of your employees. So it makes no sense for a police officer to claim to have any power that you didn't have first. Training maybe, bigger budget, but not power. In particular, the situations in which the police can carry guns must necessarily be a subset of the situations where you can do that. And to claim otherwise is to say that the substitute has more power than the original, which is absurd. So that's the theory anyway. As you might have noticed, we've drifted away from that somewhat over the years. And we've drifted so far, in fact, that I think it might be time to start thinking seriously about how to set up police departments more along the lines of volunteer fire departments. There are details to work out, and it's not something that can happen overnight, but defunding the current police departments would be an excellent first step in that direction. The alternative? Well, that's to continue on the current path, where we pay some members of the public to prey on the rest by claiming powers that no substitute or agent could possibly have in order to enforce what we cannot properly call law. Thank you.
Well, I feel bad for the next speaker who's going to follow that up.
You need to have him on a radio show!
I can make that happen.
You need to have him on a radio.
I just want to follow up on something Ian had said. This week, Representative Catherine Rogers was on my show. She's the prime sponsor of that background check bill. With that being said, one of the things that she said to me was that we put restrictions on our constitutional rights all the time. Like, you're not allowed to yell fire in a movie theater. We've all heard that one very commonly. And I asked her one question. I said, why are you treating me like a criminal? Criminals are this much of the population. Most of us, dare I say, sorry Ian, we're law-abiding. We're not criminals. When you put that restriction on to say that you can't yell fire in a movie theater, do you hand people duct tape to put over everybody's mouth because a few maniacs might yell fire in a movie theater? Absolutely not. Personally, I'm tired of being treated like a criminal when I've done nothing wrong.
Crop TV.